Visceral fat is the nasty belly fat around your stomach. I'm gonna share with you in this lesson the easiest diet to follow to blast, melt visceral fat in less than 14 days. How do I know this can be done? Well, this is a photo of me. When I was 250 pounds, 34% body fat, I had a ton of visceral fat, and I applied what I'm about to teach you, and here's what happened to me. I went from 250 pounds, as you can see on the screen here, to 170 pounds right here, 34% body fat to as low as 6% body fat. I had a lot of visceral fat. Those are signs of visceral fat. You can see the love handles here, and you can see what happened as a result, before and after. So you're about to get the same results that I did. I know this works because this guy right here, me, when I was 24 years old, I was struggling with a ton of fat, obesity. I had prediabetes and high blood pressure, and I tried so many different approaches, and it wasn't until I followed this approach that I'm gonna share with you these 7 steps to burn visceral fat. That's what I achieved in a short amount of time, and I'm gonna lay it all out for you right now. The first step to burning visceral fat is to lower a hormone called insulin. When this hormone insulin is elevated, a ton of visceral fat gets stored around your belly. This is a problem because that visceral fat applies pressure to your heart, your kidneys, to your liver and your pancreas, and it creates chronic disease, fatty liver disease, obesity, cancer, heart disease. Insulin is the hormone that tells your body to pack on the visceral fat. It's the only hormone in your body that stores fat. That's pretty interesting because there's over 600 hormones in the body, but only one signal fat storage, and that hormone is primarily the hormone insulin. Now, cortisol works with insulin to do that, but it's insulin that's causing this visceral fat. All right, now let's unpack. Out of the 3 macronutrients out there, which one causes the most insulin spike? Well, the research is clear. When you eat carbohydrates, you can see it creates the highest blood insulin response. Protein is number 2, but it's a moderate insulin response, and fat barely touches the dial on insulin. This is basic human physiology. All the medical textbooks verify this. So if we know that it's carbohydrates that spike insulin the most, that means the first step here in your protocol is to swap carbohydrates for protein and fat. When insulin is high from eating carbohydrates, your fat-burning hormones, they go and they hide. They cannot coexist with insulin. So just to give you an example, what are the foods people eat that they think are healthy but actually are causing visceral fat? I'm gonna show you some crazy stats right here. These are some stats from chronometer.com/KetoCamp, where you could input your food and it gives you the amount of grams of carbs, protein, fat. It gives you all the calculations, all the nutrition. I input that into the system, and I'm gonna give you an example of the common foods people eat they think are healthy, but it's causing weight gain, it's causing visceral fat. So this is an example of an acai bowl. 1 acai bowl from Jamba Juice. How many teaspoons of sugar in that? 20 teaspoons of sugar, which equates to 99 grams of sugar. That's a huge blood sugar and insulin response, all right? Lucky Charms. I know most people don't think Lucky Charms are healthy, but hey, let's look at the stats here. In 2 servings of Lucky Charms, so 2 bowls, we have 12 teaspoons of sugar, 60 grams of sugar. Then we have oatmeal. Okay, a lot of people try to lose visceral fat and they're eating oatmeal. They think oatmeal helps them lose weight. Does oatmeal cause an insulin spike? How much sugar is in oatmeal? In just 2 servings of oatmeal, there is 52 grams of sugar. Not to mention all the glyphosate and contaminants that's usually found in oatmeal. That's besides the fact here. Orange juice. People drink orange juice thinking they're getting their vitamin C. 2 cups of orange juice, 16 ounces, is 52 grams of sugar. Therefore, what you're gonna wanna do to start tapping into visceral fat by lowering insulin is to remove the following foods. We have oats and oatmeal. You wanna get rid of that. Cereal. That goes for all cereal, even whole grain cereal. All bread, grains, fruit and fruit juices, because fruit and fruit juices contain fructose and sometimes high fructose corn syrup. Huge glucose and insulin spike. That causes fatty liver and visceral fat. You want to avoid quinoa, white and brown rice. You want to avoid potatoes and sweet potatoes, all legumes, including beans, peanuts, lentils, and chickpeas. Ideally, you want to drop your total carbohydrates under 50 grams total per day to lower insulin enough to make a metabolic switch to fat metabolism, fat burning, where your body starts burning that visceral fat. This is the first step that I did to start burning my visceral fat. Now the question is, what do I eat, Ben? You're taking all my favorite stuff away. There's some really good food you can eat. Here's what you want to swap them with. You want to replace those foods with the following fat-burning, insulin-friendly foods. We have cauliflower rice, squash rice, and cabbage rice. That's a good replacement for white rice or brown rice. We have eggs, the whole egg with the yolk. It's amazing for insulin resistance, fat burning, amazing for fatty liver disease. We have red meat like beef and lamb. Wild-caught salmon is amazing with its anti-inflammatory properties. It has EPA and DHA. It lowers inflammation, allows your fat-burning hormones to do their job. We have poultry, organic poultry, ideally, chicken and turkey. I put eggs on there twice. I guess I did that subconsciously because I love eggs so much. Goat and sheep dairy would be better than cow dairy. If you do cow dairy, raw, organic, grass-fed cow dairy should be okay. But the reason I put goat and sheep dairy on this list as opposed to cow dairy is because goat and sheep dairy contain 30% medium chain triglycerides, which actually helps you get into a fat burning state faster than cow dairy. Greens like arugula, which is a great bitter for your liver to detoxify and burn fat. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. This is a good list of fat burning foods. Now there's a lot more, and I put together a recipe called the Keto Camp Recipe of the Week. And these are recipes you can get by scanning the screen right there. I'll get out of the way for you, or going to ketocampresrecipes.com. I'll drop a link down below. But these recipes, I've worked with the food journalist for 6 months to put together insulin-friendly, fat-burning recipes, protein-focused, healthy fats, low carbs, and it takes all the guesswork out of it. So you just follow the recipes, you get one a week in your email inbox, and it's easy and quick to make, and it tastes pretty good. All right, second step here in your protocol is to stop snacking in between your meals. Every time you snack, you raise glucose and then insulin, even if it's a healthy snack. And here's a crazy stat. My colleague, Dr. Don Klum, did a patient population study, and he found out that the average American eats 17 to 23 times per day. How is that possible? It's the grazing, the handful of almonds, the sip of the kombucha, the protein shake. Every time you eat, if it's a snack or a full-on meal, it doesn't matter. It's a meal to your body. It's going to disrupt your metabolism. It's going to prevent you from burning visceral fat. The example I always give is like this example here. Let's say you're in your office at home and you're in a flow state, working, very productive, and every 2 to 3 hours somebody bangs on your door and disrupts your workflow. That's what's happening to your metabolism when you eat every 2 to 3 hours. You're spiking glucose and insulin, and you're disrupting your fat burning workflow. So the first step here, the second step I should say, along with the first step, is to eliminate the snacks. You're gonna start by just having 3 meals a day, and you're gonna work your way up to intermittent fasting, which we'll discuss how that helps you burn visceral fat in a second. The third step to burning belly fat are sprints. Sprinting is the best exercise you can do to blast, melt visceral fat. I'll share with you the protocol, and it's pretty easy, by the way. It might seem too little, but I gotta tell you, it works like a charm. But let me explain how this works. When you do high-intensity interval training, a sprint at an all-out effort, and then you rest and recover and repeat that a few times, you activate hormones in your body, that like human growth hormone and others, that really allow your metabolism to get more efficient and use stored fat for energy. It's a very energy demanding activity, sprints, and you're gonna allow your body to burn through your sugar reserves, called your glycogen stores, and then make that metabolic switch, blasting stored fat, visceral fat for energy. So the protocol is very simple. You do this 3 times per week. You're gonna sprint, all out effort for 20 seconds, either outside or on a treadmill. You could also do it on a bicycle, by the way, if you have bad knees. All out effort, like a lion is chasing you for 20 seconds. Time yourself. Then you're going to rest for 90 seconds total. Ideally, you wanna sit down, maybe lie down for 90 seconds, allow your body to go back into a parasympathetic state. And then you do it again, 20-second all-out sprint. You can do that for 3 total rounds. And you're only gonna do that 3 times per week. Maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They should only take about 5 to 7 minutes. You might wanna warm up beforehand, but 5 to 7 minutes. What a wonderful way and a fast, easy way to burn belly fat. So sprinting is the third step here. The fourth way to burn visceral fat. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is no alcohol, or limit your alcohol. But if you go no alcohol, even better. Look, before I get into these stats here, alcohol is a poison to your body. It's a toxin to your brain. Even if it's the cleanest alcohol in the world, the most expensive alcohol, every sip will kill brain cells inside of your body. But it's not just that. As it relates to visceral fat, your liver is a very important organ, not just for detoxification, but for fat loss. And when you have alcohol, your liver and your metabolism needs to metabolize and prioritize getting rid of that toxin, the alcohol, before anything else, before fat burning, before any other detoxification processes. So you slow fat burning, and another reason why is alcohol stimulates appetite and decreases testosterone levels for up to 24 hours. So you're probably gonna eat more carbohydrates, eat unhealthy, and you're gonna have lower levels of testosterone, and it can increase estrogen levels, especially beer, by 300%. This is why they call it an infamous beer belly. It's really just an estrogen belly. Biochemically, the higher levels of estrogen are, the more readily you absorb alcohol and the slower you break it down. It becomes a vicious cycle. So have a mocktail that's not sweetened. Have sparkling water. This is what I do. Sparkling water with a sprinkle of lemon. Sometimes I'll put some drops of stevia or monk fruit, but no alcohol if you're serious about burning visceral fat. Okay, the fifth step here in your protocol is walking. Getting at least 7,000 steps a day. 10,000 steps are even better, but doing it after eating a meal. After eating your meals is the best time to do this, because when you eat food, you're going to have a blood sugar spike. Even with the lowering of carbs that we mentioned in the protein and fat, there's still going to be a rise in glucose. And the more metabolically unhealthy you are, the more visceral fat you have, the higher that blood sugar spike. The higher that blood sugar goes after eating, the more insulin is required from your pancreas to be pumped out to clear that excess glucose out of the bloodstream and into your cells. That's not good. The more insulin, the more you store fat. So by going for a walk, you blunt this big spike in blood sugars, and you allow less insulin to become produced, meaning you get into a fat burning state faster. Walking is one of the best things you can do. And this study proves it, and there's numerous studies that show this, but this study titled The Effects of Postprandial Walking on the Glucose Response After Meals with Different Characteristics. So what this study did, they took participants in 3 different groups. One group ate a low carbohydrate meal. One group ate a mixed meal of carbs and fat and protein, and the other group had a straight up high carb meal. And all 3 groups, when they walked for 30 minutes after a meal, saw positive results. Here's what the study said. Although higher glucose levels were observed with the high carbohydrate meal, our findings show that a 30-minute postprandial, meaning after eating, brisk walk session improves the glycemic response after meals. Huge. So 30-minute walk after all your meals, and if you can't do it after all your meals, do it after your biggest meal of the day. I interviewed a world-renowned expert, Mike Mutzel, who's a fat loss fitness expert and a good friend of mine, and he's gonna share with you right now why walking is one of the best ways to burn fat, visceral fat, overall body fat, and extend your lifespan. So check out this clip. It's gonna blow your mind, from Mike Mutzel. If people wanted to shed stubborn fat, Mike, how can walking help with this? And what is the right method of walking to make this more efficient?
Ben, great question. I think people need to think about walking as a mandatory aspect of their lifestyle, irrespective of whatever diet or fasting program they're doing. Various studies have been emerging over the past, I want to say 5 or 6 years, finding that the threshold for the number of steps that we should be walking every day is right around 9,000. So that's what people should aim for. Other studies show about 12,000 for preventing different diseases. And these are common conditions. There was a huge meta-analysis involving 1.3 million people, finding that if you walk at least 8,600 steps per day, you can avoid and reduce your risk of developing all sorts of conditions, from sleep apnea to depression to high blood pressure, improving metabolic health, reducing visceral fat. So that's really important. But getting back to your question specifically about losing belly fat, we should be breaking our walks up into what I consider, and researchers talk about this, exercise snacks. So having 3 or 4 2,500 step sessions interspersed throughout the day. So, people are always wondering like, well, will coffee break my fast? Will this or that break my fast? Walking actually helps you trigger the autophagy mechanisms that are some of the health benefits linked with fasting. We can get into the sort of synergy between exercise and autophagy and the parallels with fasting later. But to get real granular with this, 3 to 4 2,500 or 3,000 step sessions. And so what that might look like is before you have breakfast in the morning. A lot of people fast in the morning. A lot of your listeners do that. Just go out and get 2,500, 3,000 steps, and then around after lunchtime, after your first major meal, get another 3,000 steps. And then after dinner, you get 3,000. And if you do these little exercise breaks, it's actually more effective than just going to the gym and doing, say, 45 minutes on a treadmill or a 45-minute walk. So interspersing exercise and walking throughout the day is better than just doing one bout of exercise. And I like to share the research from a gentleman known as his name is 𝙈𝙊𝘍𝙊 at UT Austin, and he's published many randomized controlled trials where they randomize subjects to either a low step count group, medium step count, and high step count. And to enumerate those step counts, we're talking 2,600 steps for a whole day. So just relegating people to a lab where they're only walking with their pedometer, 2,500 steps. And then they randomize people to either walk 4,500 steps or 9,000 steps. And then what they do after this is, I think, over the course of 2 and 4 days, depending upon which study they publish, they've done a few of these different trials. Then after those interventions, they will give the subjects a standardized high fat test meal. And they'll look at markers of fat oxidation as well as post-meal hypertriglyceridemia. So I know you talk a lot about lipids and biomarkers. High post-meal triglycerides are a strong independent risk factor of future heart disease as well as metabolic deterioration, and it's a proxy of poor fat utilization and handling and poor fat oxidation. So you don't want a strong high post-meal triglyceride level that would suggest that you have some degree of poor metabolic health. And so what the investigators found is when people do not walk at least 8,000 steps per day after the standardized test meal, they have an exaggerated post-meal level of their blood triglycerides, which, as I mentioned,
Wow.
very problematic, arguably worse than LDL cholesterol, which we can get into later. And the differential in fat oxidation between the low step count group, again, most people are just walking about 2,000, 3,000 steps per day. They get up, they walk, they go to the car, they drive to work, they get in the office, they sit all day, then they drive home and watch TV. And so most people are pretty sedentary. And there was a 30% reduction when comparing the high step count group, around 8,500 steps, compared to the 2,600 step count. So if we think about just 2 days, and this is, some people might be traveling, going to Yosemite or Yellowstone with the family, they're in an RV, Winnebago, they're eating chips and hot dogs and things like that, sitting around or on an airplane. So we do this people do this all the time, and we wonder why we can't lose fat. And this is one very simple way to just improve your body's ability to burn fat. Because going further, what the study did is they also, in one arm of the study, they had individuals do a 60-minute zone 2 exercise session, which, as we know, zone 2 is actually, I don't think it's the best for long-term fat loss, but when you're doing zone 2 low intensity cardio, you tend to, the body relies more upon burning fat for fuel to give your muscles energy during that exercise session. There wasn't a statistically significant increase in fat oxidation in the low step count group, meaning that if people don't walk a lot, but they go to the gym, they're not getting the most mileage from that gym session because you're not just doing these daily activities of daily living that are supporting fat oxidation. So yeah, to be very concise, 3 to 4 sessions, walking sessions of 2,500 to 3,000 steps interspersed throughout the day. And honestly, Ben, this is great for mental focus. I mean, you can only focus on one finite task for a short period of time. And so this just really helps break up the day. You feel better, you digest your food better. We can get into the circadian rhythm health because I encourage people to walk outside. Even on a cloudy day, the intensity of the sun, the lux, is well over 1,000, which really helps to entrain your circadian clock system and foster that sleep pressure later in the day. So there's a bunch of different health benefits, but yeah, it really helps people lose a lot more belly fat.
I'm sold. I have been sold for quite some time. You broke it down so well, and the evidence this research is clear that it's beneficial, especially when you chunk it out. So 9,000 steps per day seems to be the target. I tend to get around 12 or 13,000 on average per day, and it's chunked. It's not in one long workout. So I tend to do that naturally with my day to day. It's the benefit of having a dog, by the way. I walk him at least twice a day, so I get outside. You mentioned going for a walk after dinner. I'd love for you to share the benefits of going for a walk after eating maybe a higher carb meal, of what it does to kind of blunt that postprandial glucose.
Yeah, this is amazing. And the way that I sort of figured this out, I mean, obviously there's research, to show this, but back when continuous glucose monitors, the Abbott Freestyle came on the market back in 2017, I had been doing keto, eating a low carb diet since 2014, got into it. And I was like, kind of curious, like if I were to go to a vegan restaurant here in Seattle, I just Googled the most popular vegan restaurant. My family went in there and we just said, hey, we've never been here before. Give us the most popular items on the menu. And it was, pizza and some breads and some different things. And I'm testing my glucose in real time. I calibrated the glucose monitor and so forth. And I could see my glucose start to continuously increase to 185 milligrams per deciliter. And so for
Wow.
folks listening, that is in the pre-diabetic range. Now, I know that might sound alarming. People are like, well, you're diabetic. It's like, no, I had been used to eating a low carb diet for a while. And research shows this. When you get habitually accustomed to eating a low carb diet and then you have a very high carb meal, your body can have an over exaggerated response to that meal. And that's exactly what happened. And, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to go for a walk to get this down. And no kidding, Ben, I went for my usual 1 mile walk with the dogs, came back and my glucose went from 185 to 85 milligrams per deciliter. And I made a video
Wow.
on this and I was just blown away. We hear all the time about exercise is good for fat loss. Exercise helps with blood flow. Exercise, helps reduce glucose and improve the peaks and troughs in glucose levels. But in real time, I was able to see this and I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And it really speaks to when you go to other parts of the world. I know some of your audience lives outside of North America, but most are relegated to North America. That's just kind of how YouTube works. And, when you go to Europe and other places, people just walk. They don't have cars and things like this. They have public transportation, but, people are walking in this, but yet they're eating bread and baguettes and pasta. You're like, well, why don't we see the obesity in parts of Europe where they do have a relatively high carbohydrate diet? And my hypothesis is they're just walking more. They're just more active and moving around more. So that I think is really important. So if someone does have a cheat meal, someone listening is going to go to a birthday or a wedding or have a barbecue, and there might be temptations with a hot dog or some chips or some ice cream or whatever. If you just go for a vigorous walk for 15, 20 minutes, that's all it takes. You can literally cut your glucose in half by doing that. And obviously there's many health benefits too, because insulin, if you are normally low carb and then you have a high glucose or high calorie meal, you're going to have an over exaggerated insulin response to that. And we know there's downsides to insulin in terms of facilitating atherosclerosis and the formation of plaque in your arteries, inflammation, immune suppression. There's a long list. And so by just helping your body do what insulin would normally do and put glucose into your muscles, by moving your muscles, you're causing them to absorb that glucose. And we already know this. In the post-meal window, about 80% of glucose is deposited in skeletal muscle. So if you just add some stimulus there by walking, because people don't think about muscle as an organ. It's an organ just like your thyroid, just like your liver, just like your pancreas. But in order for this organ to work, it needs stimulation. And so we need to stimulate this organ through activity. And that's where exercise really comes in. And people don't think that walking is an exercise, but it really is. You're moving those muscles. And I will tell you, there's research out of Copenhagen. Researchers in Denmark outside of Copenhagen have done studies finding that in diabetics, the leg muscles become insulin resistant before the musculature in the upper body. And I know people go to the gym, they lift, chest and biceps, and I do that stuff too. I like lifting weights, but you need a lot of stimulation in your legs because for some reason they become sort of disease-like before the musculature in the upper body. And I would argue that part of that is because we have, through natural selection and just how humans are either hunting, historically, ancestrally, hunting or gathering. We're moving. We're never meant to sit in our cars for 3 hours a day in rush hour traffic or sit in desks. We should be moving. And this is one of the things, if you look at the blue zone research, we're hearing so much push about, well, you got to go on a plant-based diet because see, these blue zones eat more plants than meat, depending upon the blue zone. So therefore the plant-based diet is the key here. It's the sine qua non of longevity. Well, not so fast. These blue zone areas are also characterized by a lot of recreational activity. In Sardinia and parts of Costa Rica, in Japan, these people move. They don't sit in their cars. They're moving throughout the day, having these so-called exercise snacks. So again, if you have a cheat meal, go for a brisk walk. It will literally cut your glucose levels almost in half.
Well, there you have it. I hope Mike Mutzel and I have inspired you to get at least 7,000 steps a day, but get those steps after eating your meal for the best visceral fat burning response. Your next tip, number 6, is to practice intermittent fasting. There are so many benefits to intermittent fasting. Here are some of the benefits I love, and there's a typo right there, just ignore that typo. So here's one of the benefits. You protect against neurodegenerative diseases. That's because your body goes through this cellular cleaning process called autophagy, where it clears these senescent cells. Insulin levels drop and human growth hormone increases. That is key for burning visceral fat. We already established we need to lower insulin. Obviously, fasting does that, but human growth hormone is one of the key hormones that helps you burn body fat. And as you practice fasting, you get a rise in human growth hormone. Studies suggest huge increase in human growth hormone hour after hour during a fast. This is your body's way of pumping you full of energy because it thinks you're going through a famine. It doesn't understand this. It's just hardwired this way. One of the other benefits, you reduce insulin resistance and lower blood sugar levels, obviously. You reduce risk of heart disease, you reduce blood pressure and overall lipids, boost metabolism because, by the way, it does not slow down your metabolism when you fast. It does the complete opposite, studies suggest. It extends lifespan, reduces inflammation, removes waste from cells, and also helps with hormones like leptin, which is your satiety hormone, and testosterone. So the schedule you're going to follow for intermittent fasting is an 18-6 schedule. This is a great schedule for burning visceral fat, something I do on a daily basis. This means for 18 hours, you're in the fasted state. No food. What are you having in the fasted state? Just water, electrolytes, supplements, coffee, tea. That's it. No snacking, no food for 18 hours. So that would mean you have a 6-hour eating window to get your food and your protein. So for example, from 12 to 6 p.m., you have your eating window. You're gonna eat 2 to 3 meals between 12 and 6 p.m., this little window right here. From 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. the next day, you can see from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. the next day, you're in your fasted state. So you're using sleep as that fasted state. You're having an earlier dinner by 6 p.m. That is an 18-6 schedule that I want you to follow to tap into visceral fat. The 7th step here in your protocol is to get 90 minutes of deep sleep. There are 4 main stages of sleep each night. You have, well, when you're awake, and then you have 3 main cycles of sleep. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. All are important. REM sleep is great for, it's called rapid eye movement. It's great for consolidating short-term memory for long-term memory, great for focus and mental clarity. But the deep sleep right here, this is where you burn fat. This is where you burn visceral fat. This is where most of your fat burning hormones are activated, and you're really tapping into stored fat for energy. And you want to aim to get 90 minutes each night of this deep sleep. You could track that with like an Oura ring. I have an Oura ring here. I'll put a link for it in the notes down below. Apple Watches, Fitbits, Whoop bands, there's many devices. I'll drop links for many of them, all of them down below in the notes for you to check out. Personally, I like my Oura ring. But if you could achieve 90 minutes of deep sleep, this delta sleep each night, you're going to accelerate your results with burning visceral fat. So here are some scientifically proven tips to get more deep sleep starting tonight. Number 1, drink banana tea. I call it nature's NyQuil. Now I got this from my colleague, Dr. Michael Bruce. Banana tea, you grab a whole banana, cut the ends off, but you leave the peel on because the peel of the banana has more micronutrients like potassium and magnesium that help you calm down than the actual banana itself. And you boil it for about 5 minutes and then pour that into a cup and just drink the tea. Great for somebody who has a racing mind at night. Drink some banana tea. Cold bedroom. Studies suggest that your room needs to be about 65 degrees Fahrenheit to get that deep fat burning delta sleep. Set that thermostat to around 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Dark bedroom. You don't want anything with light at night. Don't have the television on, put your alarm clock far away, put your phone out of the room or shut it off. And if you can have blackout curtains, that's best, but you could also just wear a sleep mask. I use the one from Boncharge, which I'll drop a link for down below, but you wanna make sure no light going through your eyes or on your skin to get deep sleep at night. Mouth taping is a game changer for deep sleep. When you breathe through your mouth at night, you are not gonna get enough deep sleep. You're going to deplete nitric oxide and you're gonna feel groggy in the morning and it's gonna be hard to burn fat. You wanna breathe through your nose. So I simply wear an adhesive, a piece of tape from Somnifix, and I'll drop a link for them down below. Every night I just put this on before bed and it trains my body to breathe through my nose, where you get more into a parasympathetic state, so you get more deep sleep. You increase nitric oxide, which is very important for cell communication and something called vasodilation. So mouth tape at night, I'll drop a link for them down below. And then lastly, take some magnesium, 400 to 600 milligrams of magnesium. I'll drop a link for my favorite one down below. Now, let's get into some of your questions here that you submitted. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, keep submitting those questions because we use them for videos. I want to address all your questions. What role does stress play with visceral fat? That's the first question. As I mentioned earlier, insulin is the only hormone, I should say the primary hormone that stores visceral fat, but cortisol works with insulin. Cortisol is the stress hormone, so it plays a huge role. You wanna make sure you're mastering your stress, and by optimizing your sleep, that's already gonna help you master your stress. But stress comes from 3 different areas: mental, emotional, physical, and chemical. So address all 3. If you're stressed out, watching the news, watching television, seeing what's happening in the world, having toxic relationships, I know it sounds like, how could this cause visceral fat? Well, it's called the cortisol belly for a reason. When you have high levels of cortisol, chronically high levels of cortisol, you're gonna create a cortisol belly and you're gonna store fat. So yes, master stress. One of the best ways to combat high levels of cortisol is with the hormone oxytocin. You see, oxytocin and cortisol have an inverted relationship. When you produce oxytocin, cortisol drops. How do you produce oxytocin? I'm glad you asked. Hugging your dog or another human being for 10 seconds or more will produce oxytocin. Watching something funny will produce oxytocin. Doing something you love, like a hobby, for me it's basketball, will produce oxytocin. Vitamin G is the best way to produce oxytocin. You want to talk about the best supplement in the world for visceral fat and chronic stress and oxytocin production? Vitamin G is where it's at. Now, I don't have an affiliate link or a coupon code for vitamin G because vitamin G is the practice of gratitude. You can see it here on my shirt, vitamin G. What you appreciate appreciates, and I'm being serious. Studies show, numerous studies, that the more gratitude you have in your heart, and I've named it, that gratitude is strength training for your soul. Whew. I love that line. Thought about it when I was walking my dog the other day. Put it in the comment section if you're watching on YouTube. Gratitude is strength training for your soul. You get an immediate benefit. There's no upper limit on vitamin G. It's free. And vitamin G, gratitude, will activate cortisol and GABA and dopamine, and it combats cortisol, helps you burn fat. Next question is, how much protein should I have to burn visceral fat? We established that you want to have less than 50 grams of carbs total per day. The focus should actually be protein. And I brought on JJ Virgin on the Metabolic Freedom podcast, and she's going to give you a masterclass, a short little tip here on how protein helps you burn visceral fat. So check out this clip with JJ Virgin.
The first one I love so much because it's going to solve a couple problems. Because if you're trying to lose fat, at some point you're going to have to go into a caloric deficit and you're going to have to achieve it one way or the other. And if you're hungry and having cravings, that's out the window. So the easiest way to be able to get into that at some point, which we will talk about, but this is the first big rock, is to eat protein first, is to prioritize protein. But I say eat protein first because I have been at too many dinners and heard too many times from women that they get too full to eat their protein. And I'm like, well, I just sat at dinner with you and I watched you have a salad with cranberries, raspberry vinaigrette, glazed nuts. You literally had a sundae. Then you had some bread. Then you had some appetizer like calamari. And then you say that and I'm talking fried calamari, so you're mainly getting dough and fried, right? And then finally your meal comes and it's like some kind of starch and veggie and a little protein, and you eat the starch, then you finally get over the protein. Of course you're full. So the easy way to solve this is to eat protein first. Now, why do I want you to do this? So when you look at our 3 macronutrients, along with water that we must have to survive, which it's interesting, we do not have to have carbohydrates to survive, as you know. Protein and fat and water we must have. We can live without carbs, which and I know this must make you crazy too, Ben. It's like, why did we design an entire diet based on the one thing that we can live without? And
It's
how is
wild.
it working for us? Not good, So, let's focus on the protein. And the reason I love that is a couple things. Number one, when you're eating whole foods proteins like wild salmon, grass-fed beef, you're going to get healthy fats too. So you get everything you need, and then drink a bunch of water with it. The reason I want people to focus on protein first is protein compared to carbs and fat is so much more metabolically costly to digest and assimilate, where fat really takes nothing to get on your body and be burned as fat or stored as fat. And we have a great storage depot, pretty much unlimited for fat. Then carbs, maybe 5 to 10%, is the processing to either get them stored in your muscles as glycogen, which is what we hope we have, like liver and muscle, or turned into fat, which is what we hope we don't do, or just burned. And then we've got protein. 20 to 30% of the energy that we take in when we take in protein has to be used in the digestion and assimilation of protein. How cool is that? So 100 calories of protein is only really 70 calories probably, or 75. Contrast that with 100 calories of fat is 100 calories. So that's the first part of it. The second piece of it, and you would think, and this has actually been shown, is that if all you did initially, this would help you initially, it's not going to be a long-term fix, but initially, if all you did was take some of the calories away from fat and carbs and move them over to protein, you would eat less overall because you wouldn't be as hungry, but you'd take in less calories overall too. It's not a huge effect, but it does make a difference, and everything counts. But the second reason I love protein is because it's going to make you feel fuller longer. Everyone's talking about GLP-1s, and I'm like, all right, well, just eat protein. It's one of the, nature's little GLP-1 agonist, protein. So protein not only helps us with hunger, but it also helps us with cravings. And as you know, those are two very different things. And so, now you've got the building blocks. We turn over 300 plus grams of amino acids a day in our bodies, and we need the protein. We need the essential amino acids from the protein to make the other amino acids and then to make neurotransmitters that will help shut down our cravings. So we're not hungry. We don't have the cravings. We've got a better thermic effect. So that's where I really like people to start, because it just makes the rest of this easy. And it's something you can do whatever diet you're following. So I always do that. Let's not get into the diet religion and the diet wars. You could do this plant-based, you can do this carnivore, you can do it whichever way you do it. But start with making protein 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of target body weight. You can even push it a little higher if you're working on recomping, and put that as your first thing that you eat before you eat anything else.
So I was going to ask you, how much do you recommend? So 0.7 to 1 gram per ideal body weight. Can you share how somebody would calculate that based off of somebody who's overweight right now and they're trying to lose weight?
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing, and this is what I used to do, but it just got so complicated. In the perfect world, we would go get a DEXA scan. We'd find out our target body weight that we'd really want to be, but based on more of our skeletal muscle, then we'd dose it per skeletal muscle. All right. You know what? The minute we start to make things hard, then people have a reason why not to. So that weight you feel good at, right? Now, I'm gonna say that we always want to look past weight to what that weight's made up of as the most important thing. However, let's just not get into the weeds of should it be 140 pounds or 160 pounds. Pick a weight. And then just look at that weight, and let's say it's 150 pounds. So you're going to go 0.7 times 150 would be how much is your lowest amount. And then you could go up to 150 grams, and really you can go higher. I mean, this, there's so much research has come out lately about protein intake, because it used to be that don't eat more than I remember I got a DM. You'll love this. I got a DM. My manicurist told me that I should not eat more than 27 grams of protein at a meal because I'm like, because what? What will happen? Where will it go? Because I'm like, it's got to go somewhere. It's not going poof. We can take protein and we could use it as fuel. Our body doesn't want to. So, it's like it's going to try to use it more and break it into amino acids and use it to rebuild. But if it had to use it, it could turn it into sugar and you could use it for fuel. Or you could turn it then and put it into glycogen in the muscles, or you could turn it into fat and store it. So you can do any of those things. It's not going to turn into some evil rampaging monster in your body. Do not worry, It's like everyone's worried about overeating protein. I'm worried about you overeating sugar and damaged fats and ultra-processed food. I don't think we've ever seen anyone, who's in the hospital because they were, they just had a really, really a pig out diet on wild salmon. And they got
No,
sick.
that doesn't happen.
No one ever. I mean, even, look at carnivore. Are you getting people sick because they're eating grass-fed meat? No, we get sick because we eat ultra-processed foods. That's why we're sick.
There you have it. So I always say get 1 gram of protein per pound of your ideal body weight. So if your ideal body weight, your goal weight is 120 pounds, you want to get about 120 grams of protein. Jay, to just establish how important that is for lean muscle mass, visceral fat, satiety, and all the other benefits. 4th question, how do you measure visceral fat? There's an indirect way to measure visceral fat. That's with the fasting insulin. It's a blood test, and if you see that over 10, you have insulin resistance, you're storing visceral fat. Cheap test to get, you gotta ask for it from your doctor. The most accurate way to test is with a scan. And I brought on a visceral fat expert. This guy has reviewed thousands of visceral fat scans. He is the world leader on visceral fat and one of my dear friends, Dr. Sean O'Mara, and he's gonna share with you how to actually measure visceral fat. And if you're listening on the podcast, we'll explain it in a way for you to understand what we're sharing. So check this out.
What are the best ways of measuring visceral fat? You can measure it quite accurate through a DEXA scan. But let's just be honest. Those of you that are aware of somebody that's gotten a DEXA scan for the purposes of looking at visceral fat, let me ask you a question. What kind of effect or influence did that have? So what happens when you get a DEXA scan, it gives you a number. And when you get an MRI scan or you get a CT scan of your abdomen, which you can get a number because there's software that can be that can quantify your visceral fat. But I was just sharing with a radiologist yesterday that runs a radiology system that it's not even important for me or a doctor to look at that MRI scan. You know who's the most important person to look at that scan?
The person who did it?
The person who went and got it. So you can see the visceral fat inside of you. Because once you understand that visceral fat, the enemy for what it is and how problematic it is, then you don't want to interpret the problems you have through a numeric reduction to a numeric figure. And
so
that's
true.
what you get when you do a DEXA scan. But when you stare at the abundance of that white enemy inside of you by an MRI scan, or if it's a CT scan, your abdomen, and the difference between a CT scan and your MRI scan is they're both about as good of resolution, a higher resolution MRI, but it's a sufficient modality to look at visceral fat by CT scan. The downside to it is the radiation that's required when you get a CT scan. And an MRI scan doesn't use any radiation at all. It uses safe magnetic fields. So from a standpoint of safety, the MRI is higher resolution, no radiation required. But CT is an important part of the discussion because women who are listening, many of you have had CT abdominal scans. And you need to go back and take ownership of that and do 2 things. One, look at the report. The report generated that will have been interpreted will be bereft and devoid of any mention of visceral fat. No doctor ever reads visceral fat. That's starting to change. Dr. Anna C. Rosa, R-O-S-A, is the first radiologist that I'm aware of who is now routinely reading visceral fat, fat around the heart, fat within the muscles, and deep subcutaneous fat in the world.
Wow.
Nobody else is reading it. If you're a radiologist, I think you need to grasp that you, just like me as an MD, it was kept from you in medical school and kept from you in radiology residency. It's the largest part of the abdomen in most people, and it's completely ignored. And it's because, in my opinion, it's the influence of the curriculums in medical school from Big Pharma that's keeping it out of our curriculum to teach doctors. But you need to visualize the visceral fat inside of you. The MRI is the best way to do that. And when people visualize it, I get lots of colorful language. The F-bomb is dropped all the time in my office when that happens. People get very upset. I've had clients get so upset that one I remember thinking I may have to call the police because they were dropping the F-bomb so much they couldn't sit, and they're running around, standing up, walking around, saying, "This is the last effing time I changed my life." And I had other clients out in the waiting room, and I was like, God, this is super embarrassing. They were all sorts of colorful language.
Well, sometimes that emotional impact is needed to make the change.
Yeah.
That's your point.
Yeah.
You see that with the image.
7 years later, that guy is still nice and lean and
love
healthy
it.
now. It changed his life completely around. I've had other clients. One client that I've told the story, I literally passed out when he visualized how much visceral fat that he had inside. Oof. And so for that reason, now I require all my clients to sit down. I don't let them stand, because this guy was standing and he went unconscious right in front of me because he was so upset when I showed how much visceral fat he had. Now, keep in mind, if clients, if you're watching, or patients are watching today, that you have to understand what visceral fat is. And so
Can we do you have images on your phone that you can show?
I do, yeah.
So what we're going to do for those watching on YouTube, if you're listening on the audio podcast, we'll explain it in a way where you can understand what we're showing, but it's better for you to go to youtube.com/KetoCamp maybe after you finish listening, so we could see exactly, for those watching, the visual impact of somebody who has a lot of visceral fat and then somebody who has a small amount of visceral fat. So we'll show that to you in a second.
Yeah, so it's really important, I think, for people to understand a little bit about visceral fat. They need to know what a good amount is. And so when people come, I spend probably about a half hour, going through good examples, like of people with a low amount of visceral fat and people that have a high amount of visceral fat.
You want to start with good or bad? What are we starting with?
So this is both good and bad.
So we'll put that on the screen as well. But
we'll send these images. So the top image is somebody who has just a moderate amount of visceral fat, so pretty good. But the bottom image, you can see this person is filled with a lot of white. So on an MRI scan, fat shows up as white. So this is Gabe, a friend of mine from the Army National Guard. I use his example a lot, and for a relatively modest amount of visceral fat. And then this is Asif at the bottom image, who has a huge amount of visceral fat. And you want to be mostly dark. Gabe is mostly dark. He's got big muscles. Asif is mostly white, and when you have a lot of white, you have a small amount of dark, because the white, unfortunately, causes atrophy, sarcopenia. So we see a deposition, a reduction in visceral fat, and this is a great example. They're almost all dark. This person has the smallest amount of visceral fat I've seen in a female.
Wow.
And she's on social media. This is Karen LaBoucherie. She gives me permission to show her image. And God bless this woman. I mean, I'll show her a picture. She's got 600,000 followers. She's a very healthy-looking woman. She actually is very attractive. She's a model. And the reason she's so attractive is because she's never had visceral fat. She it's the influence of visceral fat, not the presence of visceral fat, that causes people to have disease. So you can accumulate a lot of visceral fat in a very short period of time and look great. Or you can have a small amount of visceral fat over a long period of time, and that influence, that trickle of all the inflammatory molecules that come from it, deteriorate your level of health and your appearance. So if you see somebody who's older, Carolyn is 59.
Wow, she looks amazing.
Yeah, and so I've been on her Instagram Live with her, and God bless her. She is very dedicated to her followers. She takes her role as a social media influencer very serious. Her and her husband frequently do shows together. And so she is routinely promoting health because she enjoys talking about the topic, and she herself has, a very healthy appearing body. So it's really necessary to understand visceral fat, where it is within the abdomen. This is the little tiny divot right there at the top.
Is it
her
giving
belly
you
button?
Oh, that's her belly button, little divot at the top there. Got it. Is it giving you a total percentage of visceral fat, like a total body fat, or is it giving you certain areas and their percentages, or maybe not at all? You're just looking at the photo instead.
Yeah, for us, we just have people look at how much visceral fat they have. There is software out there, and it's free, by the way. If you are a radiologist and you want to start scanning and reading visceral fat, and you want to both quantify it with a numeric value, as well as qualitatively share it with patients if they get through it, there's free software that will actually quantify it. Now, when we were studying our startup for the National Science Foundation, we were spending money on software development to do our own proprietary system to quantify it. We actually abandoned it. We had the ability to measure it, and we stopped measuring it because it didn't have any demonstrable impact on our clients.
It was a distraction.
Results. It was, because you give them a number, you really want to show them that bad amount of fat. So here's another example of somebody that has a huge amount of visceral fat.
Show it to the screen so Cameron knows what's going to put on. Yeah.
So in the top example here is somebody that has a very large amount of visceral fat.
Oh, you lost it.
Very large amount. I'm glad you picked that up. Of visceral fat in that top image. And these are their legs, corresponding leg images. You see all the white streaks, and those leg images are from fatty infiltration of a fat within the skeletal muscle, or it's fatty replacement of muscle tissue, or it's also called adverse muscle composition, or myosteatosis is the technical term for it. So the more visceral fat you have, the more of this inflammatory infiltrating fat you have going on within your skeletal muscle. And, you can understand why your muscles would stop be performing as well. And nobody's talking about it. It's completely ignored by doctors. When CTs are done, MRIs are done, they don't talk about either visceral fat or those fatty infiltrates. And then here's another individual that has mostly muscle inside, very, very small amount of visceral fat, and their legs are very lean, very dark. They look like filet mignon. There's no marbling or fatty infiltration going on. So
very different between those two comparisons.
Yeah, I call them bricks and clouds difference. This image up on the top corner looks like human wagyu human skeletal muscle, marbleization of the skeletal muscle. So I think it's really important to have good, accurate imagery of these targets, and DEXA scans don't allow you to visualize it, they quantify it. CT scans allow you to visualize it, and you can quantify it through CT scan, but there's radiation. But one of the reasons why I talk about CTs again, as I mentioned earlier, is because so many people have had them. You need to go back and get that report, but take a look at that image yourself. You're entitled to it. That's your record. Go and look at the amount of visceral fat that you have within your CT scan of your abdomen, or if you've had scans of your extremities, take a look at fatty infiltration and see where you're at. And you could, particularly if you changed your diet or changed your lifestyle, you can measure the impact.
How
and
often?
the interval change.
How often should we be retesting?
Well, I recommend, for my clients, I scan anywhere from 3 to 6 to 9 months. I have some clients who only do it once a year because they have such low levels of adiposity, either visceral fat or fat within their skeletal muscle, that once a year is adequate for them. But I would say for the majority of people, you probably want to be doing it every 3 to 6 months. What is the limitation? One is time. It takes a little bit of time. You got to drive there and go get it done. An MRI scan of the abdomen scanning time is about anywhere 9 to 10 minutes or so. But the cost is oftentimes a limitation for other people, for a lot of people, because that MRI
it ranges
scan,
by state to state.
it does.
Right.
Yeah, excellent point. So MRI in one location like Los Angeles, the cheapest I've seen about $240. Some places in Florida where we're at today, you can actually get MRI scans in the Miami area for around $250. But then up in my area, a couple hours north of where I live, that same MRI scan, cash pay, discounted, will still cost you $2,900 for
What
a single.
a difference.
I know.
So you're
Market.
better off flying to Miami,
Yeah.
enjoying the weekend here, getting a scan done, and then going back to Minnesota, right? That's where
exactly. Yeah. So you should shop around, and I have a course, some videos.
What's your website?
On just my name, www.dsheanomara.com, drshawnamara.com.
We'll put it down below as well.
And I have an educational community. It's just drshawnamara.podia, podia.com. And so you can join my educational community where I do a lot of educational videos and courses and things, even teaching people how to read their own MRI. Why? Because doctors don't know how to read it. They won't read it. And so very often if you request an MRI, to look for visceral fat, they won't even do it. So, you should put on indication why you're requesting an MRI, say chronic belly pain or diverticular disease or something else.
Good tip.
Because they won't do it.
Yeah,
they
it's
hear visceral
ridiculous.
fat. One client that actually in Florida, it's a great story. He goes, he requests an MRI scan for visceral fat. The front desk approves it. The technician goes and does the abdominal MRI scan. The report shows up with the request for the radiologist now, and he goes, I don't know how to read visceral fat. He goes, oh my God, you got to cancel this scan. Give the patient their money back. So literally the client got all his money back from the MRI scan and got a free MRI. And of course, I could read it, and the client knows how to read it because of his follow-up scan, and I teach all my clients how to read their own scan.
So valuable.
It worked out well for them. So just be careful about what your request is if you want to try to get an MRI scan for to look at your visceral fat. If you say visceral fat, the doctors they're gonna cancel your request, and you're never gonna get your scan.
There you have it, the easiest diet, simple steps, 7 steps here to burn visceral fat. Follow it and let me know how it works for you, and share this episode with a friend. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love a recent video I just published on foods, 10 foods that put you in a fat burning state. I discussed a few of them today, but there are a few others that I get into in this video. Check out this clip. I'll see you in that next video. There are 2 types of food that we eat: foods that cause weight gain and foods that cause fat loss. Numerous studies show how beneficial olive oil is, not just for your health, but for fat loss, weight loss resistance, insulin resistance, and also diabetes. The findings showed that the group consuming the olive oil was more effective